GM for a new venture studio based out of Toronto. That's part of the Ontario Teachers Pension Plan, which is actually one of the world's largest pension funds with hundreds of billions of dollars worth of assets. And there I am spinning up new companies every year to year and a half to help their portfolio expand and diversify, leveraging the assets that they already have. So I've been having some fun in various fields, taking a look at how we can do carbon sequestration using seaweed growth with farms. And right now looking at something in the fintech space in digital installment loans. So quite varied and having a lot of fun looking at different ways to grow different products. That's me in a nutshell. Oh, I guess I'll also mention I'm a mother of two. I've got an 8-year-old son and a 10-year-old son at home.
Thank you. That's a very interesting nutshell, to put it that way. And yeah, so but do we have any questions here? Not yet, maybe. So I'm going to still use some of the other questions that were already sourced. So yeah, let's get a little bit technical maybe already. So this one came from Victoria from our team, and she was asking how to balance between growth and technical excellence. For example, tackling tech debt.
That's interesting. I actually, if you go on my blog, so Sylvia Ng, my first name dot last name, I have a framework that I've posted up on there that I've done a few talks on called this 8-step product growth framework. One of the steps in there that I recommend everyone do is actually take a look at how your operational streams will work on your team. And by that, I mean actually deliberately setting out a portion of your time for specific things, a portion being deliberately meant for tech debt. So, I mean, different companies I see handling it differently, but I have found that carving out time works quite well. The other way to do it is carving out a team, obviously, right? In a team of 20, you could say, hey, a team of 2, maybe designated specifically for tech debt. But usually what I recommend is more looking at the time basis instead of the people, so you stay flexible, because I mean, it tends to be that, or the challenge that you run into with the tech debt especially is that the context if you'll have the 2 people there, let's say, let's take that example, you designate them, they end up being the only ones with the context to handle that debt, be it bugs or maintenance or whatever it happens to be. And now if you're talking about debt that doesn't include maintenance and bugs and is just more, you know, we have 10 years of crappy code, that for me is a different story. So I'm just talking about more like maintenance of your everyday debt. The problem with having 2 people designated is that they end up holding all the context of how to do that work and what the general code base looks like. So why I recommend moving to time-based is that you can actually take a more flexible model and put people in and out of playing that 2-person hat. So the hat kind of moves around your team. There's pros and cons to that, obviously, like the context gets shared. But on the flip and people don't always have to play that role over and over again. It tends to be a job that no one wants to do on the team. So there's pros and cons, but typically I recommend that time-based. And from a planning perspective, if you are the growth product manager, what it then allows you to do is actually kind of flex on how much investment to make in that time without necessarily it being attached to the people. Because once it becomes those 2 people's full-time jobs, it's very hard then to say, okay, let me flex you down this week or flex you up on another week. So that's where I tend to recommend you take a look. It's just like, okay, of all of your resources, especially on the engineering side, how much do you think you need for that? And I don't know, I get asked a lot, like what percentage would you actually pick to put in the debt bucket? For me, it depends on too many things to have a set answer. Like I would say I see commonly somewhere between 10 to 20% in larger companies. If you are just getting started, 20% is obviously clearly too high. Like if you're pre-product market fit, I don't think that really matters. Just work with what you have until you get to product market fit. If you're in a much larger organization, you're in growth mode, that will kill you in the long run. So you need to start taking care of that. In which case, I think 15 to 20% is not unreasonable. It's a long-winded answer. Does that answer that question?
I think it does. If there's any follow-up question, I'm sure we'll see it coming. And then we've got Isame here on Zoom asking, how would you prioritize growth within your excellence field while looking for new opportunities?
Prioritize growth. Samir, are you talking about like personal development growth, like people growth, or something else? Or is it more, I was wondering what you mean, like.
May I jump in here? Yeah, no, what I mean is the business field. So you have a value proposition, you are providing value for your customers, and you have something that you are very excellent in. And then how would you prioritize the growth within this field while also, looking for new opportunities within, I don't know, maybe tackling a new group of users, or a totally new market or something?
Yeah, that's a good question. How I've tackled it in the past is honestly doing a portfolio investment approach. And I mean, it may sound a little too businessy. So again, I think it would depend on the stage of your company and what you're looking at in terms of strategy and levers. But one way, say that I've looked at it in the past, and this showed up also at Shopify, is to look at it maybe in 2 or 3 lenses. One being the maintenance of what you have, and then 2 being kind of like the we call it like close to home expansions, and then the really more farther out longer term investments. So I mean, people have different ways of naming these things. Some people call the longer term farther out advancements more like innovation pieces, and then the closer to home pieces just as growth. And typically what you would want to do is have a portfolio strategy where you align with the whole team on, let's say 5 to 10% is longer term innovation. And maybe 70% is your existing base and just growing that, and maybe another only 5% in the medium term bucket. That's normally how I approach it in terms of a strategy. There's a lot to talk about there, I think, in terms of where your company is at generally, and are you actually looking at a completely new user base? Are you trying to build a marketplace? Because then that obviously plays in. From a growth perspective, I do feel like if you're looking at your traditional funnel and you haven't closed the loop into getting virality on your existing base, I would say that getting virality is a next step that I would definitely recommend you look at before you start looking at getting to a whole new user base, right? So you can kind of lay out all of your potential tactics and strategies on how much of a low-hanging fruit is it? How much do you need to invest to get there? And then kind of carve off by portfolio sizing, what percentage of your team do you want to be investing in those things? And then you obviously need like leadership alignment, board alignment on getting to those longer term pieces, because what you're almost saying to the whole company and to the board and to your stakeholders generally is that longer term investment piece, call it a 5 to 10 year investment, they're not going to see money coming back from that for 5 to 10 years, right? And you're asking for investment now. So what you really need to characterize is, hey, I'm going to bound that investment by 5 to 10%. I think you can get to something in 5 to 10 years, but we need to start investing now. And I think a lot of people don't characterize that enough necessarily, and broadcast that enough within a company, and they start building it. And then, 2 years later, someone comes and is like, why did you spend your whole time getting into this new base? That's not worth it. But once you start painting on, okay, well, that was actually only 5% of my time. The rest of my time I was building your main base anyway. So we had nothing to lose. It becomes a totally different picture.
And one more question here. Concepts like, the SCurve concept is, do you find this framework is useful in such cases?
This is a personal opinion, but I find, and I don't know if it's just because I'm old, but the more experienced you become, the less useful any one framework is. Because the more you see, the more you realize there's nuances in every single situation that one framework cannot possibly address. So what in your mind goes, and I feel like, if I were to take my own career progression, and I see this a lot, when you're first starting out in this space, you rely more so on frameworks than anything else because you don't have that experience in it, right? So you take up the books, you go to Inspire, whatever, SCurves, and you start taking the scenario that you're in and applying those frameworks in it. And over time, what you do is your library of frameworks just grows and grows and grows. In your head, the matching and picking off different frameworks into your scenario becomes better and better, to the point where your framework of how you're approaching that decision is bespoke and unique every single time. So do I think that there's value to any one framework? Yes. Do I think that the value is only ever in one framework? Hardly ever. And my advice probably, like for new people, like it's almost like, yes, absorb as many frameworks as you possibly can. And as you go in your career, keep on absorbing it because it will only help. But the value of any one thing over time starts going down. And I think also over time, the value of you talking to other people who have absorbed just as many frameworks, if not more as you, also starts going up because they are able to kind of spar with you on those bespoke things better than any one, like the framework never talks back to you is the problem. It's like, you'll say, oh, but what about that thing there? And it's silent. Whereas what you need is really this group. And I'm sure this is why product people started this and why something like this event today is so great, is that you can start sparring with other people around you on, okay, is this where you would have put this framework or is some other framework better? And how do you actually take 2 frameworks, 3 frameworks together and put that into some decision-making model that your team can use?
Right. Thank you. Does that clear it, Isami?
Hopefully that answered your question. If I tend to rhyme off on stuff, so if we don't, please feel free to press back.
Thank you very much. This is very helpful. Thank you for all of these useful insights.
Yeah.
Perfect. So thank you again, Sylvia. And then another one here from Angela. So she says, hi, Sylvia. I have recently transitioned to a PM role from a general manager role. I'm not experienced enough, but I can see they built a lot, not giving much thought of a growth strategy. Now I am in a position where I would like to start building the solution from scratch, but that will mean months of work wasted, plus a lot of pressure from stakeholders. How would you go around this? Have you ever found a similar situation? I work for a small startup, if that gives you more context.
So if I'm characterizing it right, then Angela, you have transitioned into a PM role, but it sounds like then that the product that you currently own is not growing the way you would want to, and you want to build your product up from scratch. Is that kind of right?
Hi, sorry. Yes. Yes, I transitioned to different companies. So I landed in this startup and they have built a massive product, months and months building a product, but it has never they don't have any thought or growth on this product. So I can see that everything that they built is kind of a waste, but obviously I'm not experienced enough to tell them, you know what, let's start from scratch. Let's get more a growth strategy behind this. So it's like, how can I reuse what they built, knowing that it might not be going in the right direction? So I don't know if you have ever encountered these situations before where something is being built in a company where you were not part of, and you land there and then you realize, okay, there's not much thought of growth behind this, what I know what you built so far, and how will you go around this?
I guess there's 2 scenarios within there. I'm wondering which one you're in. Either the product that they built actually has value and is meeting some customer demand, but is not growing. Or what you're saying is the product itself is actually not solving any customer problem and isn't valuable on its own. If it's the former, I believe there are definitely ways for you to get past the fact that it's not growing. It becomes more of a marketing growth problem than a product growth problem. The second one is much, much harder to do because, to your point, I think you might be stuck on that one then, because of what you're basically saying is the product actually isn't delivering value to the end customers, period. You can't grow your way out of that problem. You can grow your way out of the other one. So if that's the case, I think what I would recommend is actually stripping, like, going back to the getting to why. I would probably recommend that you bring everybody involved in and say, why did you build this product to begin with? And get alignment on the why. Because the typical why is it should be that you're solving a customer problem and meeting some unmet demand with that. If you have agreement on that, then I think you already have this alignment of everybody and what you're trying to solve. And then it almost becomes like hopefully a natural conclusion that what you have built is not doing what you wanted to build, because it's not meeting that unmet demand. And then hopefully then you can take it take them on that journey that you're already embarking on. It looks like okay, well, in order to solve that customer problem that you thought you were solving, we actually need to build this. And from there, building in the growth of the product. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Thank you very much.
But then I think, unfortunately, you might find, because when I've run into these situations before, unfortunately, they actually never thought of what problem they're solving for the end users to begin with. In which case, do I have a very strong recommendation for you? Unfortunately not. Like, I think you're going to even have to take one step farther back and say, the core of any product is to solve a customer problem. And I'm not seeing where it is. So you are then starting it from scratch. But I think hats off to you, because I think that is, like, of all things that a PM can do, that is top of the list. And so for you to dig in on that and jump in on day one, hats off to you, because that is what the job is about. It's a good thing that you're not shying off away from that.
Thank you very much.
All right, great. So moving on to another one. And okay, so interesting one. Are there times in the product life when one should not aim at growth, but rather have other priorities?
Well, definitely, if you look at, like, the life cycle of companies, and typically what you would see as the stages of the product, I do think the goals of what you should be looking at as product manager changes, right? If you are looking if you're completely looking to get started and growing, just getting an MVP out, I think it's actually completely valid to say my only goal right now isn't growth, is just to get an MVP built, period. After that, that's when you're looking for problem solution fit, right? After that, you would be looking for, obviously, the product market fit. And what you're looking for there is searching for product market fit in terms of language, in terms of, like, are you actually matching or have a spot where you're matching the demand that you see with the product that you have built with that MVP. Beyond that, you're starting to look for channel product fit, right? You're looking for optimizing the funnel, searching for the specific channels that you can keep on finding the fit through. Then after that is typically where I would characterize then you're actually looking at growth, right? Only if you have the MVP and product market fit and product channel fit, are you actually really doing growth? I mean, there's probably many different other opinions on what growth actually is. I tend to say that if you start looking at growth too much before those things, you end up doing too much growth and not enough product, and not really looking at the hypotheses of where your product should be placed and what channels you go after, right? That's when you start looking at, like, you're throwing spaghetti against the wall. It's like you don't know what channels you're going to find your target audience in, but you're just going to try them all. It's like, I'll go on everything, go on YouTube, Instagram, whatever, and hope that I'm going to find it. It doesn't typically work like that, as opposed to having a very concerted, like, experimental framework of finding this is my customer that I identified, and this is where I'm actually going to get traction. So yeah, all that said, I think earlier stages you might not really be looking to grow, and as your company grows, you're going to end up with different products in various stages. So it's just managing through all of that.
Yeah, it makes total sense.
Oh, and actually, killing products, I should probably rant on that one a little bit. I don't think companies kill products enough. And as you go, things aren't going to work. So at what point are you as a team able to cut it off and say, I'm no longer building out this thing? I mean, it goes back to Angela's question of, like, this isn't working. At what point do you actually call it quits and do something new and start again? And so that is not a growth thing. And I think we actually lose sight of that too much. A part of growing your company necessitates that you kill products and don't grow everything that you have. You have finite resources. You can't grow everything.
Yeah, absolutely. Makes total sense. Thanks for that. So yeah, let's take another one. So how to differentiate between the different types of growth and how to know if a product is not growing quickly or well enough?
How would you know what is good enough? Yeah, it's interesting. In the end, I feel like there's only our opinions on this, right? And then there's the opinions that who matter, and the people who matter when it comes to those opinions, and the people who don't matter. And most of your job is figuring out as a product manager who does and who doesn't. Your end customers always matter the most. That's it. And then around you, there could be your team. There's your board members, your bosses, etc. I would say those are secondary, because if your customers are pleased by you, then you will grow, and therefore all the other secondary stakeholders hopefully will be happy too. So for me, it's like a bit of a pyramid. Everything else, what I say here, what every other product manager could tell you, whatever a growth blog podcast out there, is an opinion that I don't think you should take too seriously, because they don't know what context you're in and what you're trying to drive at. And I think the good thing about, like, since I started Madeira, my own brand, like, just imagine if you were to build your own brand and how different that is, or your own company, in terms of you setting your own goals. Because if you had that flexibility, would you still be asking me this question? Because a lot of them comes down to, okay, if you're the owner of your own business, it's the lifestyle that you want, right? Like, how much growth do you want? Maybe you want to optimize for your weekends kiteboarding, making this up. And you want to balance that with how much time you spend on your company, in which case you will draw the line to what you, as the main stakeholder in your company, wants, right? So I don't really think there's a one set answer for that. I think too many people look to these benchmarks out there in an attempt to feel comfortable with what they have set internally, but I don't, like, I feel like there's not too much utility necessarily in that. So go with what you feel is, if you are the primary owner in this whole situation, then I think just go with what you want. If you're working in a larger corporation, or even like a smaller one where you have a lot of stakeholders, then go with pleasing your customers first, and then everybody else second. I would say, regardless though, in what environment you're in, if you're in a team, you need to align with everybody on the targets and goals and what success looks like. That for me is a whole other discussion, whether you use a framework like OKRs, like objectives and key results, and have cadences against that, or whether you do yearly planning, quarterly planning. That also, by the way, is in my framework that I mentioned earlier. The 8 steps process is to actually set these targets and align with your team on what success looks like. So all I'm saying is that I don't really have a prescribed, you must make X many users in the first year, or X revenue, or break even by 18 months. Like, all of these things for me is case by case. Is just making sure that you align with the people that matter on what that looks like, and drive towards those being indicators of user value, as opposed to the other way around. It should never be, I can also have a whole other talk on this, but in terms of setting goals, I'm a big believer in you setting the goal first and the measurement for that goal afterward. You can't have the measurement be your goal. Like, for me, for you to tell me that you're gonna hit 10 million in ARR, whatever it happens to be, in 5 years, is not a goal, unless you've already reached product market fit and you're already growing. Or actually, even with that, I'd probably be questioning it, because my question is, how are you getting there, and what is your real goal beneath that? Are you getting to 10 million by starting a marketplace, by going after new channels, by delivering new value through product add-ons, by changing up your business model, by pricing? Like, all of those things are separate goals. And for me, ideally, you'd strip all of those goals down back to what it delivers to the end user. The end user is going to get value at half the price than before. The end user is going to have a faster way to commute. The end user is going to have a better way to eat breakfast. Whatever you're working on is to strip it down to a goal that the user cares about, because then that will force you to think about the ultimate opinion.
Yeah. I mean, the way you put it is really, I think, covers it. And yeah, I do agree that it's quite situational. And then looking back at the people that matter, as you put it, would really like help set out like how it should be done, and like how well was it in the question, like how quick or well enough the growth is happening. So yeah, thank you for that. Then we've got a question. All right, here. So okay, that one's a bit broader.
That actually, Mansoor, it's interesting because when if there's the question of, hey, what is good look like to me and to the team? What do I care about? And then there's the question of, what do other people care about? Like if I were to pitch this to an investor, what would they look like? In that case, I really do think you should look at some benchmarks, because other people have their own lens on things. Yeah. The benchmarks do matter. All I'm saying is that I don't really think you should care necessarily all the time about what they're saying, because, oh yeah, this investor thinks that across the board, and nobody should spend more than 10% of your revenue on marketing. Great, that's an industry benchmark. Does that apply to you? Like,
yeah, it's again.
Yeah,
it's
so I just don't want you to think I'm not telling you not to look at benchmarks, because obviously, people do look at that in terms of, okay, where do things fit in? I tend to say, if you're running product, it's not the end thing.
Yeah, no, I agree, and thanks for the clarification on that, just in case. So yeah, there's another question that's not really about growth, but like a broader question. So growth product manager versus product manager roles, and how do you see the evolution of these roles? Okay, so I imagine maybe they're asking about like conversions or divergence in these different roles, because it's true that we are seeing more growth product manager positions popping up here and there.
Yeah, so as a baseline thing, because it's a good question, because I end up in a lot of discussions about that with various companies and how to set up their PM orgs, and whether those two things are actually separate. I think mostly what everyone agrees on is that growth needs to be part of the base product manager description nowadays. Or like, unless you are in an industry where you are creating a product that isn't digital at all, and maybe are relying on growth in other ways in terms of offline sales, you will want to be looking at digital growth baked into your product thinking, and therefore the product management job description, so to speak, needs to include growth from day one. So then you start wondering, okay, well, as you like, if you're a company and you're starting from day one, you only have one product manager, that person has to hold it all, including the growth. Over time, as you add more and more product managers, at some point you start thinking, okay, let's say you have 10 to 15 product managers now. You start wondering, okay, should we have various very specific product specialties within this team to round that team out? Right. So either you go and ask everyone to be a generic product manager and hold everything forevermore, or you start specializing individual people, so you can say, okay, Sylvia, you like growth, why don't you start going deep into that? And Mansoor's on the team, but he's going to start going really deep into the technical pieces on engineering, and that's how we're going to round our team out. And maybe, I don't know, Anna is going to be doing the business aspects of it, and that's how you build out your team. I think that's a perfectly like good thing to start looking at as your team scales, because you do want to look at specialties. The problem, like the con of that approach, obviously, is that you end up potentially having a mismatch of the product scope with the skill set, right? Because in that case, you want all of your product across all the product managers to be growing, but now you put the skill set onto one product manager who can't product manage all the products. So that's why you have 15 product managers. So either you are really, really good at getting that specialty out and start having almost like a product operations layer whose only job it is to share that knowledge across and back. So, you can have me focus on growth, but I come up with the frameworks of how the company approaches things generally, or I do lunch and learns. That kind of thing can then flow the growth knowledge back to Mansoor, and Mansoor can do the same thing for all the technical aspects back to me. That's a valid approach. Or you can actually say, which is a third option, is to not have it in product management at all and start putting the growth pieces onto other people, right? You put it on either a product operations team completely or put it onto a product marketing team, which you can debate whether that's in product or in marketing. For me, it is pros and cons. I don't know if there's one way to do it. I think the most dangerous thing to do having everyone try to hold a little bit of it and include it in the job description is safer than the other way. The other one, I do think you're taking a risk that nothing grows, right? So I think that's mainly, if you were to make that decision, to make that really carefully and deliberately, and making sure that the knowledge and the accountability still happens within the rest of the organization for your growth to continue.
Okay, thanks. Let's take the question here from Thomas. Thomas, thank you. We've been keeping you waiting, I guess. Took other questions from elsewhere. So what strategies would you advise to evolve a company that relies on a very traditional sales-led GTM, successful but costly, into one more scalable where growth is at least partially product-led?
Some of my advice on that actually might depend on what your product is. I mean, like traditional sales-led go-to-market speaks very enterprise B2B. To me, as a company and a product. And if that's the case, are there a lot of strategies that I would suggest where you can do product-led growth? It actually might be quite limited. Like if you're selling into government, I have no strategy for you to go product-led growth and out of sales. I just don't. If you have maybe a blend of that, something where it's not very, if your decision maker that you are selling to isn't a group of 10 people in an obfuscated org where you cannot even get an org chart out from the outside, then I do think there are strategies. If you are in this realm where you're selling into an organization where you need 10 different decision makers to say yes to your thing, I mean, there are tactics that you can put in place, but it's very hard for me to say that that is a strategy. Like you need to befriend your sales team, get them onto other sales growth tactics. Sending cupcakes I have found works really, really well, as in getting your sales team to send cupcakes to the 10 people. You can do targeted ads to the 10 people. I've seen that work too. Like as in when they search their own name in Google, your ad shows up as "I want to talk to you." There are these kind of tactics. Would I ever say that any of them are really a strategy in and of itself? Unfortunately not. If it's someone on this team or in this call right now who has a strategy for addressing that issue, let me know. I would love to hear. If it's in a smaller, I only need like one or two decision makers in not so large org where things are a little bit more transparent and you could actually see a path to getting to them digitally, then I would recommend you actually mapping out, as with always, the value that you can provide to those two people very specifically in their day-to-day. So not necessarily looking at the funnel of what you currently view is your sales funnel to product, but the funnel of how these people deal with the problem that you're trying to solve for them. And within that funnel, create a product in one of those slices. So I'm trying to see if I can give you an example here. Let's say you're selling, I don't know, CRM software or actually maybe HR software to companies for hiring right now, right? And maybe you're selling to the SMB market where you're looking at the chief people officer of a company to say yes to you to using the software. And the problem you're trying to solve is the recruiting in our world of mass resignations. So what you're wanting to do is map out what the current funnel looks like in solving that problem of dealing with recruiting, right? And then say within that, what can you pick off to create a product that isn't your main product? It's not your main software, but a product that can then lead them to you almost automatically, right? And in the sales funnel. So maybe what it is you realize that nobody wants to sign job offers anymore because housing is a problem in large cities. I'm making this up, but actually I do think there's something there. And you give loans out to HR teams now to get people mortgages. So if I sign on with product people tomorrow, I get a free mortgage, I get free housing. Great. This solved the HR person's problem. It wasn't your main software, but that will get you them talking to you. So that's my overall framework as a strategy. I have seen that work quite well, is you mapping out their other funnel that ultimately is kind of in the same problem space, but you pick off a slice much earlier on in the funnel and solve their problem in a very tool-like way, right? It has to be, you have to pick out something that's very thin. It can't be this deep, I need a 10-year software build to address it, because then that defeats the purpose. It has to be some very like lightweight product that you can address, almost like a tool that you can throw at them for free and then bring them into your sales funnel post that. There's lots of examples actually you can think of in terms of growth tooling from Shopify that you can take a look at. Yeah, so Shopify obviously is an e-commerce platform. So if we were to take that example, their main thing is to give you a whole shop that you can run online, but you'll find like a million free tools that they run, millions, too generous. A lot of free tools, right? You can get a invoice maker. You have a whole stock photography platform called Burst. You have logo maker, which went viral in Japan when I was there, called Hatchful. So all of those things are just meant to do exactly what you're doing, what you're talking about here, is to bring people into that sales funnel and relieve the reliance on face-to-face sales.
All right. So yeah, and Thomas, thanks you. That was interesting. Let me check. I don't think I have many other questions coming in right now. Anyone here on the call would like to add something? Doesn't look like it. Well, I do want to ask something which is a little bit, that was asked by the team when we were sourcing a few questions for today. So what would be like some sort of mantra or wisdom or anything that comes to mind when we talk about product growth? Like what would be your personal reflections maybe, or advice about, taking the whole thing into consideration?
Growth mindset comes to me as one. I don't know, that's been a topic that you guys have been covering as product people. Do you guys talk about that one a lot in terms of mindset? There's that, yeah, there's the Carol Dweck book that she wrote a while back that obviously has been in the tech world, I think, for a while now, which I really do believe in from a how do you approach growth perspective, not just like as a team, as a company, but personally as well, right? It's shifting your mindset away from, I can't do this thing, as in I can't grow this product, into I can't grow this product yet. And actually reframing how you talk to yourself and you as a team talk to each other about what's needed to get there, and putting yourself in that mindset that failure is okay and actually expected, and to kind of keep pushing yourself to keep learning as you go. So that one, I don't find that one necessarily new, but I do feel that the principles of how you approach growth are really, really important. Then the other thing for me is actually staying really close to the customer, because I do find it because as I'm describing the customer the life cycle of the company journey and when growth plays in, growth does tend to play in later. And by the time you're in that later stage, it's very common, I think, for people to not remember their original purpose in serving that customer need. So growth ends up becoming too much of a company problem that you're trying to solve, like grow revenue for the company, than it is solving a problem for the end customer. And once you're in that realm, you're not going to grow. It's too self-serving. You're thinking too much about yourself and your company than you are about the people that you're serving, who will then give you the money that you want. So for me, it's all about mindset and framing of the the goals and the problems that you're trying to achieve.
Awesome, thanks. And yeah, so sorry, I was on mute before and I couldn't answer your question on time. But yeah, we do think of it more or less this way. Yeah, and so
my answer to, like, I don't know if you want to ever dig into stuff. I have a whole other pitfalls of product growth talk that I do. Like, I can rhyme them all off, but it's quite a bit. Like, lacking product principles is one, not having a common language, no focus, like trying to do too much of everything. You know, it's like you talk to a team like, oh, have you thought of this? And they're like, yes, and we're doing that. Have you thought of this? Yes, we're doing that too. Have you thought of this? Yes, that's definitely on the plan. And then like 5 or 6 things later, okay, well, which one are you doing? Like, you can't be doing that. That lack of focus for me is very common pitfall. What others?
We'd love to talk.
Yeah,
Would definitely love to have you on that one.
Oh yeah, I mean, the deck is already all there, so I can just come and present it if you'd like being too data, or like doing the balance of being data informed but not data driven is a big thing for me. Everyone wants data. You should have data nowadays for sure, but what you do with that data is still, I don't think, very commonly done well. You do want to be informed. You don't want to be driven by your data. It puts you into this local maximum and not a global maximum. So yeah, I can keep going on this. No clear measurement of success, data, like different types of personalities in the team not working together. You know, it's like you think of a company, you can think of who drives that, the decisions, right? If you had to over characterize it, you can say that Facebook is a data company. You can say that Airbnb is a design company. You can say that Google is an engineering company. But by the time you say that, it becomes problematic for everyone else who isn't in that discipline. It's great if you're an engineer at Google. What happens if you're not? And how do you manage that within the team, right? Because there is this, and it almost touches on diversity and inclusion. Are you actually including everybody, all the voices on your team, and making them work together? Because the magic for me happens when all the disciplines are working together, as opposed to, well, it's great engineering. That's all we need. Yeah, but for some products, that maybe that is all you need. But then, like, what are the roles of the other people on the team playing? So I have a whole list of this.
Yeah, but I think that last point was really good, because yeah, this thing is really underrated, and people tend to, you know, to categorize, as you said, like things as like unidisciplinary kind of product or thing or company. Perfect. So yeah, I think I don't know if anyone else has any questions. I don't see any other questions right now. If anyone would like to ask their question or to draft it really quickly. I mean, well, if not, I think that has been a lovely session with a very insightful takeaways, I guess, for each and every one of us. At least from my end, I could say that very clearly. And thank you again, Sylvia, for joining us. Thank you for sharing your time and your knowledge and your expertise. And thank you, everyone, for being here. We'll see you again in our upcoming events on Tuesday evenings and Thursday mornings occasionally. I'll share with you the links so you can check out our next events. And with that, I'll thank you again, Sylvia, and wish you all a good day or good evening wherever you guys are. Thank you,
Thanks for having
and
me.
goodbye. Pleasure.